Are joined by the Business Secretary, Grant Shapps. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us bright and early. Look, it feels as though a bit of a shift, certainly yesterday, in some of the mood music coming out of Downing Street in relation to these talks with certainly NHS unions. Can we see a breakthrough? Can we see those strikes being averted next week for nurses, even though the RCN said they were bitterly disappointed? Is there going to be some movement?
Yeah, and Unison said that they thought that some progress had been made. But look, everybody wants this to come to a conclusion. It's in the interest of everybody, those who are striking, but obviously the country as a whole. And you know, people like nurses do a terrific job and did through COVID, which is why they were the only ones to get a pay rise in the public sector last year with COVID. And we hope that we can find a way forward, a settlement. But today in Parliament behind us, I'll be introducing a minimum safety level, service level bill, which will sort of say, look, we will never withdraw the right to strike from people, but you know, when there are strikes on, life and limb must come first, and there has to be a minimum safety standard put in place for that.
Take at least 6 months before that gets through, and yet tomorrow ambulance workers and paramedics will be going on strike, and a lot of people will see that as a failure on the part of the government to stop that from going ahead.
Well, first of all, just in terms of timetable, I don't think the legislation will take as much as 6 months. But actually, I should say, we don't really ever want to have to use that legislation. In those most recent strikes, the Royal College of Nursing, the nurses, agreed a set national level of support. Unfortunately, we couldn't get there with ambulances across the country, meaning there was a bit of a postcode lottery as to whether an ambulance would turn up in the case of, you know, something serious like a heart attack or a stroke. And we can't have that, so common sense tells us that we need to have minimum safety levels, which is what I'll introduce. But I just want to also remind everyone, the government has accepted in full the independent pay review body's recommendations for pay. So we're the ones who've actually accepted it. Obviously, it takes two to tango, and that's why these talks are going on.
Set before inflation went up and the cost of living crisis.
You're still, Secretary of State, prepared now to go further. I mean, the soundings that we're hearing today is that there's going to be more on the table. Why the sudden shift? Why is the government becoming suddenly more generous with all of this?
Yeah, I should say on those independent pay review bodies that they took into account inflation and projected inflation in reaching those numbers. And it's right, it's done independently of government. That's fair. Of course, there's a cost to everyone of pay rises, whether it's on, you know, to railway workers or train drivers or people in the NHS. The rest of society obviously has to pick up the bill for that, and it's a question of getting that balance right. And then in terms of, you know, your question about sort of why now, well, a lot of these strikes, particularly on transport, have been running for a very long time, and they've sort of turned into almost forever strikes, and we want to constructively work to bring that to an end if we possibly can. It's a new year, and so we're trying to encourage everybody to the table to see if we can't find solutions, and that's the big push from the government's point of view. And you know, as I say, I think it's important that we bring these strikes to a close. We're looking at inflation rates, I think, peaking and coming down this year, according to the Bank of England. And so, you know, we want to get on with making sure there are public services there for all of us.
Yeah, a lot of this is not just about money on offer. I mean, when we look at the Royal Mail, when we look at the train transport situation there, these people are worried about their jobs. They're worried about job security going into the future. If you were giving a message to Royal Mail workers, posties, and you know, people who are working on the trains and they're collecting tickets and whatever they're doing on trains, would you be advising them to go and get new jobs in the next year or so?
No, that wouldn't be my advice. But actually, you pick a couple of interesting sectors of the economy because they've obviously changed radically. I mean, people don't send letters like they used to in the past, but there is a big and growing parcel business. And on the trains, people don't use tickets like they did in the past. You don't need people collecting tickets in the same way. A lot of that's turning contactless. A lot of it's barcodes.
You would be advising them to go and get new jobs.
The shape of the... No. No, it wouldn't. But what does mean that can happen now is that people can be used more flexibly. For example, get rid of some of these working practices which really belong in the arc. You know, you've had really, particularly on the railways, which I know a lot about. You've got some of these working practices which go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, which could be modernised and actually modernise the safety of our railways as well. But there's been a lot of objection to making those kind of changes. But therein lies the solution, because if you can modernise, you can also pay people better in return for that improvement in productivity, and that's one of the things that clearly makes a lot of sense.
Grant, you worked under Boris Johnson in the cabinet with him. He's making a speech at the Carlton Club tonight. Don't know if you'll be attending. Lots of people talking about whether or not he might be planning a bit of a comeback. Certainly feels, does it not, as though the Sunak bounce hasn't materialised. His poll ratings haven't shifted at all since he became Prime Minister. In the speech last week, not perhaps as big a success as he might have hoped.
Well, look, politics is a longer-term sort of programme than that. We've got a programme for government, and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, laid out 5 different things that he wants to see done last week. The sort of priorities, very much people's priorities as well, stopping those small boats and halving inflation and getting growth into the economy, cutting the waiting list. So I think he's actually talking about the things that people care about. We're still quite a long way out from a general election, and people aren't really focused on that. What they're focused on is their daily lives and dealing with the things we were just talking about, these very high levels of inflation that, thanks to Putin, have hit the whole of the Western world very, very hard. We're not on our own on this, but the thing that I think Rishi is almost uniquely positioned for, as a former Chancellor, as a finance person, is good, sound management to help get us out of this. So looking forward to working with him over the next couple of years.
Just got about 45 seconds left, Secretary of State. Good business sense to send British tanks to the Ukraine?
I'm terribly sorry, there's a loud...
We're just talking about the possibility of British tanks going to Ukraine. Is that a way to win a war?
Well, look, we've already provided a lot of materials to Ukraine. We got out ahead of other countries and did it before the war, of course, and we provided a couple of hundred armoured vehicles to Ukraine. I can tell you we will be, in the year ahead, providing at least as much support as we have financially as in the previous years. And, of course, this country's generosity is run in many different directions, including perhaps 120,000 Ukrainians who are over here, including 3 who live in my house, actually. So this country's been extremely generous when it's come to its response to Ukraine, has led the world, and I'm sure we'll carry on doing that in whichever way is best.
Business Secretary, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your time today, and thanks for braving the elements.
You're welcome.